questions we're asked is, how do you do what you do? Not just once, but over and over again. And the second question we're asked is, how can you help us do what you do? Like you did with Apple in the early days, Microsoft and Google later, and many of your clients today. So today, that's what I'd like to try to answer. I'm going to draw on some lessons learned, some customer observations, and PARC experiences. So those of you who don't know, PARC was founded as Xerox PARC in 1970, and they were chartered with the mission to create the office of the future. And there were many inventions and technologies that came out of that. One is a PC. But not until it's coupled with many of the other inventions does it really start to take on deeper meaning. So coupled with laser printing, it enabled desktop publishing. Coupled with graphical user interface editing, or what you see is what you get. That actually made computing personal. Coupled with networking, it allowed distributing data and being able to move information across people and devices. Coupled with social science around design technology, enabled being able to really create resounding products. So I should note that even though Xerox didn't necessarily commercialize the PC, it did take the desktop publishing or graphical laser printing actually to market and made billions of dollars and more than paid for its investment in PARC many times over. But what it did next was really bold. What it did next was spun Xerox PARC out so that other companies could actually realize the research and development that it did, which wasn't in Xerox's core. So for the last 10 years, PARC has been a wholly owned subsidiary working with multiple companies, bringing technologies to market. And besides the new technologies it created, it actually started to develop a new innovation model. So being incorporated meant moving from a captive research and development center with one customer and one single mission to being a company that commercialized product and had to think about being a profitable company. It had multiple customers and it had many different focus areas. So today, we're in the business of breakthroughs. And that might sound like a paradox. I mean, business we think about being predictable. And breakthroughs we often think about as being unpredictable. But over the last 10 years, we've worked through processes and mindsets in even adjusting our culture to address this. So today I'd like to talk about that, but I'd like to pause because the things I'm going to talk about that are relevant to PARC, I think are really relevant to any business that wants to do transformational innovation. So thinking about innovation, how do our clients think about PARC and innovation? We think of 3 different models in terms of the way we work with our clients. And each of these models is important because one of the things they have in common is that they not only help a client to go faster to market, but they actually are higher probability or are less risky than any of our clients going it alone. The first we call creating. And this is where a client comes to us and they have kind of a general concept and want help bringing this concept to reality. And this is where we often engage our ethnographers, and we work with them. And we work with them in a way that we are technology agnostic, trying to help them realize an opportunity, helping them create a new market opportunity. The second is CoDeveloping. And this is where a client generally comes to us, and they have a specific roadmap, but they need a technology that we've already invested in. And we work together collaboratively to develop something that actually suits their market and their application. The third we call enabling, and this is where a client has a very distinct roadmap. It's already really well populated, and they just really need one piece of IP or one service, and with that we collaborate, and it's a little bit more plug and play and kind of gets them off and going. The way we work, though, we think there's more value in the first 2, where we can really draw on a lot of the magic that we think about PARC. This is what we call our business engine. And in this business engine, you'll see several different cogs. So one of the really wonderful things is the last 10 years since we spun out, PARC's been a profitable business. And so we invest in a lot of our early ideas ourselves. But we also use government funding to invest in some of this early stuff that's really high risk. And then you'll see this other cog over to the side where we work with partners because we think in transformational innovation, a lot of times the value chain isn't there. So we may have to work with partners to get new novel materials, or we may have to actually find a new way to manufacture something. So having this in place when we go to the last cog, which is our end client and our end customer, really helps them put this all together. And it's really interesting because this last cog, we found that where we really resonate is with really large companies or with really small companies. But having all of this together, our end clients can really draw on all the years of investment and all the things that we've brought together to actually de-risk their approach to the market. So now you have the background for the rest of my talk. And one of the things you might ask is, with all these experiences, what might I relay that's the most important thing to do transformational innovation? And for me, it's drawing on being able to look at the human element, being able to do agile development, and create an innovation culture, bringing all of these three together. Often we think that if you want to do incremental innovation, you can have one of these. But not until you're really at the middle of these three do you actually see transformational innovation. So let me start first with looking at the human behavior and context. So almost always, we start by applying our ethnographic practices. And ethnography, let me get the last one up. Ethnography is where you observe humans, people, in their natural environment, and you look for what their fundamental needs are. And this actually was born out of anthropological sciences and was really practiced first in academics. So how did it get transformed to industry? So Lucy Suchman, a Xerox PARC researcher, came up with this novel idea. If we're building technology and innovation, maybe we should actually watch people using it. So she went down the hall and she grabbed a few colleagues and she put them in front of a Xerox copier and gave them a copier assignment. And this is what she saw.
Place 1 to 50 originals. Well, wait a minute, I have 100 originals. Face up. Place all originals against the left wall. We want two-sided copies. Unload top paper tray. Now, do we want them collated? What? Reverse order the originals? You gotta be kidding. This is definitely a bug. Press start.
Does that relate to that?
Unload top paper
We didn't do
tray.
that. That's not this. That's not the paper tray. It doesn't say what the paper tray is, huh? So our first batch
Our first,
is SOL.
what is that?
Should have.
But well, we sure did come up with a lot of paper.
So I'm glad people swore earlier because I was a little concerned about this. But I think what was really interesting is that these colleagues down the hall were PhD computer scientists with 40 years of formal education. So it wasn't that these users were dumb, it was the design of the copier. And now most people have utility studies and are able to, there's actually groups within companies that watch how people interface with technologies. But back then it didn't exist. I mean, Lucy Suchman had to think of it. And she went beyond that. She actually thought, if we could help design a product, and think about how to design its interface and its specifications, maybe we could actually go beyond that. And maybe we could use it to design new products in the first place. So she combined the fundamental insight of Margaret Mead, which was that people have this inability to accurately describe their behavior. And she, along with other PARC researchers, developed techniques and methodologies to observe humans, to come up with novel solutions before problems were even expressed in the first place. So that brings us to this equation. You know, a lot of companies really deal with the right-hand side of this equation. And being able to solve the problem right is really, really important. But at PARC, we actually believe transformational innovation really comes from the left-hand side of the equation. Being able to figure out what problem you should actually solve. And many times, we actually start in a general direction without even understanding fundamentally what that problem is. And we spend a lot of time trying to decipher what the problem is. And we believe, again, this is where transformational innovation actually happens. So I'm going to first start and talk about Agile Development. And we believe that Agile experimentation is an iterative process at the framework. That it's not either-or decisions. That you need to quickly test a hypothesis, and then you need to be able to learn, improve, and adjust. In fact, we think of innovation as pretty much, at its core, a learning process. And the faster that you can learn and improve, the better. And when it really comes down to it, we think this is more of a mindset. Even though it's a mindset, though, we think it can be enforced with some supporting processes. And so we've developed a methodology around innovations and services that's very repeatable. And most of the time we start out with doing ethnographic fieldwork. And here we'll go out and observe our end users and really try to get to the heart of what's the problem that these people are facing. And then once we've done that, we'll do models of the users and we'll look at work processes and information flow. And then we'll sit down with the end users and start to try to model what solutions might be for these end users. And once we have that in place, we'll develop a prototype. And then we'll expand it beyond this set of end users to other people, trying to understand what were the flaws in our original assumptions and go back and iterate. So some of the benefits about this, we've talked about solving the right problem, are about the fact that we can quickly iterate without costly revisions. So we haven't really invested in an end product until we cycle through this many times. Oops.
Installed prototype meters in our company parking lot and asked people to park. Here you see one person who immediately understood that she couldn't park in a reserved spot.
Does that mean somebody's already there? Oh, this one's reserved.
This is this process
This participant didn't have a reservation and needed a spot for an hour, and he took the numbers to mean there was an hour and a half left on the meter.
Is that one already paid with an hour 30 on it? Looks like it. I'll take it.
We learned we had to do a better job of communicating time available, since misunderstanding it means getting a parking ticket. So we came up with several design options and chose 3. The testing uncovered various usability problems we could easily address, but the biggest problem was that people slowed way down, or even stopped, to read each meter before deciding whether they could park, because each meter had a different amount of time. Some people even backed up to get a spot they'd passed up earlier, hoping to find one ahead with more time available. One of the main benefits of reservations is that it reduces congestion, but we realized that having different times on the meters might wind up increasing it instead. So we rethought our approach and came up with a design that lets you choose a block without reserving a specific spot. When the time is near, the system sets 1 to reserved and all other open spaces to the longest amount of time it can given upcoming reservations. As each reservation is filled, open spaces continue to update in sync. This way, drivers won't need to check each meter separately and won't be tempted to hunt for the one with the most
time. I think someone called that. So you actually get to see this methodology in practice. And this is a project that we're doing with Xerox, but for a large metropolitan city. And you can see if we went out with our first design, we would have still probably been stuck with a lot of traffic where people were trying to observe the meters and not really understanding kind of the sequence of timing. So you can see the power of this, actually. So I'd like to go to the last one, which is innovative culture. And we actually understand that when companies do incremental innovation, that they're generally pretty good at this. And you see this in product lines extensions or other services offerings which are aimed towards the same market that a company is originally servicing. And again, people are generally really, really good at this. But we find that if a company is trying to reinvent themselves or trying to do something radically different, that they really need to look for answers or solutions outside of the domain that they have expertise in. In fact, when we've worked with clients, we often notice that this domain expertise acts as blinders in terms of really being able to look for solutions or really being able to look for new problems. So, I always worry when talking about culture that things are going to sound really cliche. And I want to talk a little bit about failure. And one of the things that we really believe is embracing failure. And again, that sounds really cliche, but we don't see failure as an end. We really see failure as a jumping off point, as a point that actually starts to beg the question for many other things that we should start looking at. And I think that is really novel. And to be honest, I think that's been at the fundamental culture for PARC for the last 40 years. It's actually allowed us to create new innovations over and over again. So I'd like to leave you with the fact that this is a global phenomenon. And you can see from the company that we keep, we work with clients all over the world, both small companies and large companies. And I'll just leave with the last bumper slide if you want to learn more. Thank you. So I see we have a little bit of time on the clock if anybody has any questions, even though I really can't see you. Please?
When you do end up partnering with a client company or even building something in-house and then kind of deliver it back to them, how do you deal with the internal politics of not invented here?
Oh, that's really great. That's a wonderful question. If I can just take a step back for a moment, whenever we kind of built our marketing department, which is only a few years old, we had to really think through, the typical marketing questions, which is who was our competitors. And when we sat down and tried to map our competitors, there's not a lot of other companies like PARC. And our biggest competitor, we feel, is companies' internal research and development groups. So, we have a lot of different ways that we like to try to resolve that problem. I think one of the ways is actually dealing with C-level decision makers that actually can influence the direction of the company. And on the flip side, we really try to engage the R&D groups really early so that they can pressure test this technology, because they're the ones that are actually going to have to be the catchers for the technology on the other side and are going to have to integrate it into their development processes.
But when they are the catcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've worked with the C-levels, but how do you actually, at a certain point, that's not a problem you can control, but how do you work with the C-levels to actually bring that down so that the resistance isn't there to actually catching the product?
So I think maybe even earlier on, we try to tease out that problem. And one of the things that we have put in our qualification criteria for working with other companies is that they've actually brought in new technologies before, so that they've resolved some of these internal politics already. So one of the questions that we ask out of the gate is, have you done this before? And if they haven't, that's kind of a red flag for us, because we know this is going to be a brick wall at some point. I think, again, on the other side, is we asked to bring those folks in really early on in the discussions.
So enroll them early.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any examples that you can talk about each of those three ways you work with customers? Like actual specific products or enablement that you've done with them?
Sure. I think one of in creating, we worked with a Japanese company where we, I think it was, Teresa, remind me? Dentsu, right? Yeah. Majidi?
Oh, that was DNP.
DNP, right. One of the Japan's largest publishing companies. And they kind of understood that there was this really big shift from paper to digital, but they really didn't understand how to play in that world. So we worked with them to design a product that was both contextual, real-time, and met a new generation's needs so that they could actually figure out how to actually decide, what event or what eatery they'd want to go to kind of real time with all of their friends. And CoDeveloping, wow, there are many different projects. I have to think about the ones I'm actually allowed to talk about. Let me go to the last one, enabling. We actually worked with DOA, and we had UV LED technology, and they wanted that technology in-house. And we actually did tech transfer and allowed them to understand how to actually create UV LEDs in their MOCVDs. And CoDeveloping, gosh, there's so many. Again, I have to think about which ones I'm allowed to talk about. I think I can talk about Procter Gamble. They have some technologies around. I don't think it's for Breeze, but they have these plug-in technologies for air fresheners, and they wanted to make those smart. So we worked with them to actually be able to think about a smart home, a smart room, in terms of being able to tie in some of these ambient type of things like lights and perfumery.
I was wondering why, you said you tend to work best with very small companies and very large companies. Why is that? What happens to the company?
It's really interesting because it took a little time before we realized those ends of the spectrums were a sweet spot. And I actually have a hypothesis. I think that it's these intermediate companies that have their nose to the grindstone. They really have to figure out how to execute, and they're spending all their effort just executing to their operational and commercial plan. And it's these small companies, which I think was kind of the novel insight for us, that had an idea but maybe needed one piece of IP to be able to augment their overall approach. Or they may, we have a fab, they may need capital-intensive equipment that they couldn't really afford on their own, so that they'd use PARC both for their capital equipment as well as some of their, they call us their CTO, to be able to augment what they actually have. And then large companies, because they're trying to reinvent themselves.